So like a curious traveler on a quest, we embark upon a journey of information. Stay with us for a ride into knowledge.
Now El was the first God of Israel. Recent archaeological, biblical, and extra-biblical research has led scholars working in the area of the origins of Israelite religion to assert rather boldly and confidently that the original God of Israel was in fact the Canaanite deity El. First, the name Israel is not a Yahwistic name. El is the name of the deity invoked by the name Israel, which translates, "May El preserve." This suggests that El was seen as the chief god in the formative years of Israel's religious practices. In fact, the story explaining the origin of the name Israel occurs in Genesis, where Jacob obtains this name through the blessings of El Shaddai. That means the El of the mountain, or as a later translation has it, the God of the breasts. Second, there exist numerous parallels and similarities between descriptions and cultic terminology used for El in the Canaanite text and those used for Yahweh in the biblical sources. At some point, it is suggested that the cultic worship of Yahweh must have absorbed that of El, because Yahweh assimilated both the imagery and epithets once used by El. Finally, there is a strong confirmation of this assimilation in the biblical record itself. In the oldest literary traditions of the Pentateuch, it is the El who regularly appears and not Yahweh, or it's Yahweh as El. The patriarchal narratives identify El as the deity to whom many of the early patriarchal shrines and altars were built. For example, we are informed in Genesis that Jacob builds an altar in the old cultic center of the north Shechem and dedicates it to El, the God of Israel. The textual tradition of this text comes from the Elohist, ultimately remembers a time when El was the patron god of Israel. That El was the deity worshipped at Shechem, and is also attested in Judges, which speaks of the shrine of El of the covenant. The god of the shrine of Bethel, which is literally translates the house of El, is additionally El. I am El of Bethel. That's in Genesis, and appears to Jacob as El Shaddai. Now, Jacob has another encounter with El at the Peniel, which is so named because Jacob sees El face to face. Moreover, Isaac blesses Jacob through El Shaddai, and likewise Jacob blesses Joseph by El of your fathers. And we are informed that Abraham's journeys to the old cultic shrine at Beersheba, where he plants and worships a tree and calls on the name of El the Eternal, and at the same time Yahweh. Wow. All right, contrary to Genesis 33:20, where the El is presented as the God of Israel, in Genesis 21:33, El is apparently already assimilated to Yahweh. Finally, Genesis 14:18-22 speaks of El, the Most High, of whom the Canaanite Melchizedek is a priest of at Jerusalem. This assimilation between Yahweh and El, or El and Yahweh, is present in much of the priestly material as well. In fact, the priestly source largely advocates this assimilation. In Genesis 17:1, the priestly writer states that Yahweh appeared to Abram and said to him, I am El Shaddai. And Exodus 6:2-3, in contradiction to the J source, has Yahweh assert, I am Yahweh. And I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, and I was not known to them by the name Yahweh. Although the verse suggests that identification between Yahweh and El of the mountain, the verse also subtly recognizes an ancient distinction between the God of the patriarchs El and the God of the Mosaic era, Yahweh. So who was El, and why is he even mentioned in the Bible in the first place, let alone as the God of Israel in the older literary traditions of Genesis? Our knowledge of El predominantly comes from an invaluable corpus of tablets discovered in 1929 in the ancient city of Ugaritic, a major city-state in the 2nd millennium BC, located on the northern coast of Syria. The Ugaritic tablets are the best available witness to Canaanite religion and religious practices, thus also to the background from which the religion of Israel emerged, and to the Canaanite beliefs that it is shared, adopted, compromised with, and sometimes rejected. The Ugaritic literature depicts El as the sovereign deity of the Canaanite pantheon. He is frequently referred to as the father of the gods, an eternal king, and the creator of all living beings. El's other epithets include El the kind, the compassionate, the bull, the ageless one, and the father of years. He is depicted as bearded and residing in a tent or a tabernacle, whose throne rests on cherubim. He is the God of blessings and of covenants. Many of these epithets and images later become assimilated to Yahweh. For example, Yahweh is often depicted as bearded, as king of the gods, as compassionate, and as residing in a tent, whose throne, like that of El, rests on cherubim. There are, in addition to this, numerous El epithets in various strains of biblical tradition, epithets that through a process of assimilation and adoption later become associated with Yahweh. Like Yahweh, who is associated with the mountain of Sinai, and later in eschatological traditions with Zion, so too El resides on a mountain. Other patriarchal narratives attest the use of El, Olam, El the Eternal, to whom Abraham plants and worships a tree at Beersheba. El Elyon, El the Most High, the God of Melchizedek, and El Roy, El who sees. These various El epithets are associated with different shrines. El Shaddai with Bethel, El the Most High, the creator of the heavens and the earth, with Jerusalem, El the Eternal with Beersheba, El who sees with Beer Lahai Roy, and El the God of Israel with Shechem. Many of these shrines and altars to El were established by the patriarchs themselves. It has also been suggested that the name Yahweh might have originally been a cultic epithet of El. Many commentators have contended that early Israelites actually worshipped El through this epithet, Yahweh. This process of assimilation is usually presented the other way around in the biblical literature. Yahweh is worshipped through the epithets of El, Shaddai, Olam, and Elyon. Contrary to these biblical traditions that suggest an assimilation between Yahweh and El, there are other passages that seem to indicate that Yahweh was a separate and independent deity within El's council. Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9 is one of those rare biblical passages that seemingly preserves a vestige of an earlier period in Proto-Israelite religion, where El and Yahweh were still depicted as separate deities. Yahweh was merely one of the gods of El's council. This tradition undeniably comes from older Canaanite lore. When the Most High Elyon gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated humanity, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of divine beings. For Yahweh's portion is his people. Jacob is allotted heritage. There are 2 points to take away from this passage. First, the passage presents an apparently older mythic theme that describes when the divine beings, that is, each deity in the divine council, were assigned and allotted their own nation. Israel was the nation that Yahweh received. Second, Yahweh received his divine portion, Israel, through an action initiated by the god El, here identifiable through this epithet, the Most High. In other words, the passage depicts 2 gods. One, the Most High, El, is seen as assigning nations to the divine beings or gods. The Hebrew word is Elohim, plural, gods, in his council. The other, Yahweh, is depicted as receiving from the first God, the Most High, his particular allotment, namely, the people of Israel. Similarly, another older tradition now preserved in Numbers 21 and 29, the god Shemosh is assigned to the people of Moab. Now, other biblical passages reaffirm this archaic view of Yahweh as a god in El's council. Psalm 82:1 speaks of the assembly of El. Psalm 29:1 enjoins the sons of El to worship Yahweh. Psalm 89:6-7 lists Yahweh among El's divine council. Thus, there seems to be ample evidence in the biblical record to support the claim that as Yahweh became the supreme national deity of the Israelites, he began to usurp the imagery, epitaphs, and old cultic centers of the god El. This process of assimilation even morphed in the linguistic meaning of the name El, which later came to mean simply God, so that Yahweh was then directly identified as El. Thus, Joshua 22:22, the God of gods, is Yahweh. Noteworthy also is the fact that unlike the god Baal, there is no polemic in the Bible against El and all the old cultic centers of El. Those in Jerusalem, Shechem, and Beersheba were later accredited to Yahweh. Since the large majority of patriarchal narratives that speak of shrines and altars to El are found in the northern kingdom, such as Bethel and Shechem, and on the other hand, many biblical texts seem to accredit Yahweh's origin to the southern, the Negeb. The current scholarly hypothesis is that the worship of El in the north and Yahweh in the south eventually merged. And as we pointed out many times, Jesus was raised in the northern kingdom, possibly even after many years, still with the El tradition. He did try to tell the Israelites, so, your father is not my father. How many times do you gotta say, your daddy's not my daddy?
Just more food for thought.
Thanks for watching this and all our videos. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until we meet again, stay curious, fellow travelers, and have a great day.